reference point, and it comes from inside. They go, well, this is the way that I am. I don't know if it's nature, I don't know if it's nurture, but it's me. And since I'm an individual, no external code has the right to trump my choices. They reject the idea of an external code. They are appealing to the inner self, the inwardly constituted self. So again, I'm not trying to settle the debate. I'm simply saying that what we call liberalism now, progressivism if you want, Obamaism, is the culmination of two massive waves of revolt. An economic revolt that began in the New Deal that locates rights in the government, and a moral revolt starting in the 60s that sees morality not as external, but as internal and subjective. Now, what should we today think about this? On the right side of the spectrum, there are generally two groups: conservatives and libertarians. What's the difference between a conservative and a libertarian? It's very easy. I mentioned these two waves of revolt against the founding. The libertarian wants to fight only the first one, and the conservative wants to fight both. So the libertarian, for example, would say that this wave of economic redefinition that began in the New Deal, this is a threat to liberty, and we should block that. We should reassert the private sector. We should return to the founding idea of rights as limitations on the government. And that's modern libertarianism. The conservative is, in a way, divided. The conservative says, yes, we want the prosperous society, but we also want the decent society, and therefore we have to resist liberalism at both fronts. On the one hand, to ensure prosperity and free markets, but on the other hand, also to reassert the idea that freedom is not morally neutral. By the way, this is an interesting question for us to think about. What do we mean when we say freedom? A lot of people say, well, freedom is like choices. It's like the right to kind of do what you feel like, do what you want. That's freedom. Keep the government out of my business. But I think that that definition of freedom is a little bit problematic. Because, ask yourself this question. Let's say the government stayed totally out of it. And 400 million Americans decided, on their own, totally freely, to become pornographers. Would the American founders be rejoicing? Would they be saying, wow, this is what we fought for, this is what we dreamed about? No, probably not. Why? Because to them, freedom was not just kind of do what you feel like or do what you want. To them, freedom was freedom for something. Freedom for what? Well, freedom for the American dream. What Jefferson a little vaguely calls the pursuit of happiness. But it's a pursuit that is believed to occur in a certain way. Family, community, religion. This is the American dream, I guess what I'm saying is, has content. So now we want to fast forward a little bit to where we are today. Modern American conservatism, or at least in our time, begins with Reagan. And, you know, I want to ponder for a little moment, because a lot of times as conservatives, we think, you know, Reagan was so great, we need to get another Reagan, who are the Republicans going to nominate, and so on. And that's a valid question. But as somebody who grew up in that era, I do want to tell you that Reaganism, which is the whole set of beliefs about Reagan, that Reagan upheld, but Reaganism preceded Reagan. In other words, Reaganism came first, and Reagan came second. And what I mean by that is that there was a big conservative ferment in the 70s, led by people like, well, intellectually, people like Hayek and Solzhenitsyn. But even when I came to America, I came in 1978 as a student, Jack Kemp was talking about cutting supply-side economics. And there was a guy talking about missile defenses, General Graham. And there was another guy talking about mobilizing guerrilla movements to defeat Soviet aggression in South America and other places around the world. So what later came to be called the Reagan Doctrine. So my point is, Reagan didn't invent this stuff. In fact, he thought of none of it. He came along and he said, I like this, I like this, I like this. And today we call that Reaganism. conservatives before the politicians can run with them. What made Reagan successful? What made him effective? It wasn't just that he was a great communicator. It wasn't just that. I think that there were certain ingredients that made Reagan particularly successful. First of all, he combined philosophical conservatism with temperamental, geniality. He was a likable guy. A lot of times when you look at conservative leaders, they're philosophically unpredictable and temperamentally stern. So they're kind of the opposite of Reagan. Temperamentally, they come across as really, anal. And yet philosophically, they're unreliable. So as conservatives, we're not sure which way to go. All this business is occurring now with Donald Trump. I'm trying to make sense of it, and I think to me, all it means is that we're at a time in our history when conservatives are looking for a new face. In other words, a sense that in the past, the Republicans have almost habitually nominated the next guy standing in line. There's a sense now that, look, we're not going to do that. We're at too precarious a point in our country's history to do that. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think in Obama, we have a very different kind, not just of a leader or president, but actually a very different kind of a Democrat. This is not a Democrat who is in the Carter, Dukakis, John Kerry, Al Gore tradition. This is someone who has a very different idea and a very different agenda for America. So here we are, the custodians of the American dream at a kind of precarious moment in American history. And yet I think it's a crisis, but it's also kind of an opportunity. It's an opportunity because what we do with it now, I think, is going to make a huge impact on 2012 on whether America continues to have this leadership role in the world that the founders dreamed about and fought so hard to help us achieve. I could go on, but what I'd like to do, since I'm going to be talking again in a little bit, is adopt the motto that King Henry VIII used with one of his wives. He said, "I won't keep you too long." I know we're at this afternoon point where our lunch is just beginning to settle. So I'd like to stop here and open the door to discussion and questions. And I'll pick up these themes further when I give my keynote in a little bit later, a little after 4 o'clock. So, any thoughts or questions? Yes?
Does Obama represent a third? Does President Obama represent a third wave of revolt? By the way, all these revolts are very revolting.
The question is, does Obama represent a third wave of revolt? And I'll substantiate what I'm about to say a little bit later. I think with Obama, you see an effort to accelerate these trends beyond anything that the founders would have imagined. Obama's motivations are very different than that of traditional Democrats. And I'll just put it this way. I think that traditional Democrats want redistribution within America. What Obama wants is realignment of America in the world. Now that is a kind of a chilling idea. Now I want to be a little careful here because there are two ways to look at this. One is, Obama hates America. Obama is a traitor. Obama doesn't want what's good for America. But another way to look at it, and to be patient with me on this, and I'll spell it out more a little bit later. The other thing is, Obama subscribes to an ideology according to which it would be a good thing for America not to be number 1, but to be number 8, or number 37 in the world. In other words, not the world's leader, but just one country in the great dining table of nations. And you might say, well, why would somebody who loved America want that? And I will answer that question later and try to show how Obama thinks and why he thinks that, and what got him to this place But the bottom line of it is, yeah, I mean, you know, if you went to Bill Clinton and said, do you want America to be number 8? You think you're nuts. That would not be his goal. So in that sense, I think we're dealing with a new type of leader, a different type of agenda. The American people sense it, but I think what's happened is there's a lot of conservative confusion about what really does motivate Obama. You know, is he a secret Muslim? Is he a socialist? This will all be stuff I'll talk about later, so I'm going to hold back on it for right now. Yes?
Yes. In talking about conserving the principles of it, is it possible to conserve those principles just by conserving them? Or do we have to conserve them by expanding them and finding new applications?
The question is really good, and it applies at 2 levels. What does conserving mean in terms of practical proposals and ideas? Are you just holding on to something, or are you creating new ideas for ways to achieve those goals? And second, I want to raise, which I don't know if it was part of your question or not, but it's implicit in it, is strategy. Does conservative strategy change? One time when I was a student at Dartmouth, William Buckley came to speak on a campus, and he asked a very interesting, and I think in some ways quite a profound question. He said, how can you be a conservative in a liberal society? Think about this. As a conservative, we conserve. But Buckley's point is, what if you happen to be on a liberal campus where the established principles are liberalism? You conserve, you're going to conserve liberalism. So what do you do in that situation? And Buckley's answer was, well, you have to change strategy. You have to stop being a conservative. Now, you don't cease to be a philosophical conservative, but tactically or temperamentally, you've got to become a radical. You have got to subvert and undermine the principles that exist. You want not to become a kind of a guerrilla, challenging the existing principles and sort of questioning them at the root level. And by the way, that's the meaning of the word radical, to question something at the root. It's not a bad thing in the right, understood in the right way. So in a way, when I think, for example, people use the word Tea Party. And to me, what that means is it is taking account of our current situation and recognizing that sort of the traditional conservative strategy doesn't work when the situation changes and new strategies are called for that are different. Now, directly in response to your question, people say we want another Reagan. And if you notice, the Republican Party, since Reagan, has been trying to duplicate the success of Reagan by chanting Reaganite slogans. But Reaganism was a specific response to the situation that Reagan found himself in the 70s. Stagflation, a Soviet bear on the prowl, a very, Iran hostage crisis. Reaganism was a specific adaptation to that. We are in a totally different world now. Big government is back, but it's not the old economic socialist debate. In fact, I was speaking at a business conference the other day and I said, you guys look at Obama as just reviving the 20th century debate between capitalism and socialism. But that's not it. We're in a new debate now, which is not about the efficiency of capitalism. The 20th century debate was which system works better in creating wealth, capitalism or socialism? That question got answered. But my point was that while capitalism has won the economic